Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to this video lesson. Let's continue our discussion about arrays, but specifically I want to talk about passing an array to a function. So I've just created a project called CSharp arrays pass to function. I've dragged and dropped a button, a label, and a text box. So for the label over here, I'm going to call this guy exam1. I'm going to move this into position. Let's say, for example, in the upper left-hand corner. That looks good. I'll move a text box right underneath it, like that. Open up the text box a little bit. That looks pretty good. Now I want to make a copy and a paste of these two so that I can have exam2 and also exam3. So what I'll do is I'll select these two by simply touching them. Control-C, Control-V, as in Victor for paste. And let me go ahead and move those into position. So I'll drag these two over here like this. That looks pretty good. And once again, Control-V for Victor. And I'm just eyeballing it. That looks good right there. Let me go ahead and create, or change this rather to exam2. And this is going to be exam3. Then I'll put a button underneath it. Something like that looks fine. And for the text property, we'll just simply say calculate. Then I'm going to have three labels, 1, 2, 3. And the first one will be sum of exams, the next one will be the average of the exams, and then the next one will be the letter grade. So I can just simply take this label over here. I'll copy and paste it, bring that over here. I also need to have a label over here with a border and also blank. So I'll just take this guy. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Auto size. So I'll take this guy over here, copy and paste it once again. But for this guy, it's got to be auto size false, border style fixed 3D. And then I'll just simply place this somewhere over here for right now because I have to change this text property so that it says sum of exams. Let me move this into position. Let's say for right now I'm going to put it somewhere over here. And then I'll just take this guy over here, like this. Make sure it extends all the way to the edge. That looks pretty good. And I don't know if this is set up in terms of its height. If it's set up correct. Yeah, there it is. I want that magenta underline because then I know that the text in the label is aligned with the sum of exams label. So I'll leave it like that. Let's say that I want that to be centered. So I'll just say top center. And now it's centered. And then at first there's not going to be any text. So I'll delete that so that it's blank and it looks like this. Okay, now I will take these two, copy and paste, move them into position, and I will also paste again and move them into position. Now, for the sum of exams, I'm going to change that to average of exams. And I'll move this a little bit closer. You see here that it looks like it's a little bit to the left. I want the colons to align, so I'll do something like this here. I'll just move it into position. Oops, I didn't do that right. Let me do it from here. Select that. Carefully move it into position. That looks pretty good right there. This guy over here, we want that to say letter grade. And now I need to take this label and move this into position. That looks pretty good right there. So now that we have all the labels and the text boxes and the button ready to go, I can go ahead and make an adjustment to the form. We have our form with all of our items in it, so I'm now going to close the form. I don't want the minimize or the maximize box, so let me double-click over here to get rid of those items. And let's say instead of form 1, switch back over here, we're going to say grade calculator. So over here, grade calculator. All right. Okay, so all of those items look pretty good. Let's go ahead and give names to the various items and text boxes and what have you. So let's go ahead and call this guy text, or txt rather. We'll say txt exam1. Let me just go ahead and copy and paste this. we'll call this guy over here txt2, txt exam2, and this item over here will be txt exam3. Of course, we have a button that says calculate, so we'll call that btn calculate. Now, in terms of the labels, we're going to call this guy over here LBL sum of exams. We'll call the next label LBL average of exams. So LBL average of exams. And then, of course, the item below it, we're going to call that LBL letter grade. So over here, LBL letter grade. Let me make sure that I've named everything appropriately. So TXT exam 1, TXT exam 2, TXT exam 3, BTN calculate, LBL sum of exams, LBL average of exams, LBL letter grade. Looks good. So let me go ahead and save my work. I'll click the Save All button. And now I'm ready to go into the code area. And so the thing that we're going to do a little bit differently here is we're going to pass the array to a function. And then based on that function, whatever it's supposed to do, it'll process the data. Now here's the thing for you to understand when it comes to arrays and functions. When you pass an array to the function, you are passing it by reference. What does that mean? It means you're passing the original. It's as if I have a Frisbee and I throw it to you. The Frisbee is no longer in my possession. It is now in your possession because I threw it to you. So you have the ability to manipulate the Frisbee. You manipulate the original data. And then when you're ready to give it back to me, I take it back from you and I see the changes that you've made. Okay? So you are passing the original array to a function. There's no such thing as making a copy and a paste or passing it by value. When you're passing an array to a function, you're giving it the original. Okay, so I'm going to double click on the button. I don't need the toolbox, nor do I need the properties panel. And of course, we're going to have our comments, such as declarations and get user input. Calculations, output. And what I'm also going to do is to create some global variables. So over here, I could either put them over here or put them over here, but in other words, they're just outside of any particular function. So I can just put stuff over here. So I'll just say global stuff. And what I want to do is I want to create a constant, and I'm going to call that array size. And in this case, the array size is going to be 3. And I also want to create another constant, and we're going to call that max exam score. The maximum that a student can get on an exam is 100 points. So I'm going to enter that. You'll notice that it's outside of my btn underscore click event, click method or function. It's global. These guys can be seen by everyone. And so in general, constants, it's a good idea to make those global because then everyone can see them. There are items that do not change. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create the array. So when you're going to create an array, you first have to indicate what the type is. Then you go ahead and put the square brackets, and that indicates that you are about to create an array. Now I'm going to call this array exam scores, and I'll assign that to the keyword new. What the keyword new does is it says it's about to instantiate something. In this case, we're about to instantiate an integer array. How big is this thing? Well, it is of size, array size. Okay. Now, there are also different ways to declare and also initialize arrays. So I'm not going to use those for my project, but at least let me show them to you, and I'll put them, after I type them, then I'll go ahead and comment them out. So I'll say below are some other ways to declare and initialize arrays. So what I could do is I could say, this is for familiar right here, if I could just say int with the open and close square bracket exam scores new int, again, array size. No big deal there, it's exactly the same. But if I wanted to give them specific values, I have 3 items. I could say 0, 0, 0. And so what this does is it creates what's referred to as an initializer list. So these values are called an initializer list. Now, the reason why it's giving me the squiggly underline over here is because I've already got this. So let me just temporarily comment this out. I'm going to uncomment it, and you can see that everything works fine here. So in other words, what's happening is not only have I declared the array, I've also initialized it. I've given it some initial values. Since I know that I have 3 items in this array, here are the 3 items. And notice that they are all integers. Okay? So that's one way to declare and initialize. Let me comment that out, and let me show you another way. So another way to do that is we'll say int, open and close, exam scores, and we'll say new int. But this time we won't put the size. What we'll do is we'll just simply indicate how many items, and then that'll determine what the size is. So the difference between this item and the one above it is that over here, inside of the square braces, we're not putting the array size. We are indicating what the size is by giving it a certain number of elements. Since I have given it 3 elements, then we know that the array size is 3 for this particular approach. So this is yet another approach. Let me comment that out and give you one more approach. And so again, this is going to be an array, integer. We're going to call it exam scores. And I'll just put open and close curly braces 0, 0, 0. So this is basically a shorthand notation. It does not use the new keyword. It does not use the int keyword. You're in essence saying this is an integer array, and here are the 3 initial values. Therefore, the size of this thing is 3. Okay. So again, all kinds of different ways to declare and to initialize. I'm going to stick with the first one, which is this guy over here. This is the traditional approach, the approach that I'm going to use in terms of declaring arrays. Okay. Now, when I have my array established with values, I'm going to need to add the items in the array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an integer called sum of exams. If I add all of the items in the array and and determine what their sum is, I'll put it into this variable. I need to also consider the average. So I'm going to make that a double because it could very well be that I have the 3 numbers divided by 3, the 3 exam scores, that is, divided by 3, ends up having a decimal point with a number after the decimal point, so I better make that a double. And then finally, I'm going to create a string variable called letter grade, and I'll initialize that to nothing at first. But eventually, this is going to have the letter A, B, C, D, or F. Now we're ready for getting the user input. Well, you know that the user entered data into the 3 text boxes, as you can see over here. So what I'll do is I'll say exam scores convert dot to int 32, a 32-bit integer. We'll get from the txt exam1 text box. So as you can see, it's already there when I type in txt. So I just hit tab. Don't forget this dot text. So yes.
Could you actually do this part with one of those initializer lists, or does that list have to contain like a number?
No, you're right. We could do that. Now, this particular array does have to have a number, but that doesn't stop me from saying convert.to and 32, the text box, and put that right in here. I could do that. Sure, in all one big statement. Good. So let me go ahead and take this guy, copy, paste, and paste. Because remember, I have a total of 3 exam scores. So this is what I like to use. This guy down here that says INS, I like to double-click that to turn that to overwrite. And then over here, I can just simply use my arrows on the keyboard and the number. So I'll say number 1, number 2 over here. Let me move over here and make this txt2 and txt exam3. Now I need to turn off that overwrite mode. So this guy over here that says OVR, I'm going to double-click it. so that we are now back into this insert mode. Okay, so I've got the 3 exam scores. I've placed them into the array. And so now I can perform my calculations. Well, the first thing to do would be to create the functions that are going to be doing this actual work. So this is what I like to do. See, this curly bracket right there belongs to this curly braces. But as I go off screen, I think to myself, wait a minute, is this the curly braces or is this the curly braces? So I always forget. I can't tell. So what I'll do is I'll copy this. And I'll go down to the appropriate curly braces and put a comment over here. Now I know that that's the curly braces that belongs to the btn calculate underscore click event. So what I want to do is I want to press enter a couple of times here. This is where I want to place my cursor right here, because my intention is to create a function. All right, so what function do I want to create? I want to create a function that's called calculate sum. So type in the word private. This thing is going to return an integer, specifically the sum. And I'll type in calculate sum. Now, what parameters does this thing have? I want it to receive the array. So what kind of array is it? It's an integer array. Now, how do I know it's an array? I have to put the open and close square bracket. What am I going to call the array when I give it to this particular function? What am I going to call it? Well, inside of here, we'll call it the exam array parameter. So I've given you this illustration before where I go home and I'm called 2 different things. My wife calls me honey, my son calls me daddy, but really it's the same person. Same thing over here. When I send the array over here called exam scores, when I send it to that function, it's still called exam scores in this context, but in this context, we're going to call it exam array parameter. Right? Could I have put exam scores over here? Yes, I could have done that. That would have been fine. All right, the reason why we get the red squiggly underline is because we haven't returned anything. As soon as I say return, that's going to go away. Well, first of all, let me create a variable called sum, because that's what I need to determine what the sum is. And I'll set that to 0. Then I'll use a for statement, and I'm going to hit the tab, so that I get the following code snippet. So what this does is it creates a very simple for loop for me. And you know what a for loop does. It just keeps on rotating a certain number of times. And in this case, I want it to rotate as long as we are less than the array size. So in other words, go from 0, 1, 2. 2 is less than 3. 3 is not going to be less than 3. So in other words, this thing is going to iterate 3 times. Or it's going to loop 3 times. What do I want it to do? Well, take the old sum and add it to exam array parameter, specifically the guy at index I, which at first you can see this is 0. So what's going to happen is this thing is going to be 0, then 1, then 2. And every time we are creating, in essence, a running sum. It's the old sum plus whatever is in exam array parameter 0. That's going to go into sum. Then it's going to be that old sum plus exam array parameter 1. Then exam array parameter 2. We're just creating a running sum. Well, once I'm done, then I can just go ahead and return that value. So over here, I'll just simply say return the sum. Now you'll notice that the red squiggly underline disappears. Okay, so that's the big secret, which is really not that big of a secret. How do you pass an array to a function? When you create that function, first of all, you indicate what the type is, like double or integer or float, whatever it is, with the square brackets. That tells this function, oh, you're gonna give me an array. By the way, in here, what are we going to call that array? And typically, I like to give it a different name, but you don't have to. If I did type in exam scores over here, let me just do that for fun, then I'm going to erase it. Exam scores. Well, this exam scores is not exactly the same as this. This is the exam scores for this function. This is the exam scores for this function. But technically speaking, since you're passing an array by reference, in other words, you're passing the original, we can call it the same thing. But I usually do this. and just realize this is like my son calling me daddy, this is like my wife calling me honey. They're both pointing to the same person, right? Just so we're calling them two different things. All right, so now let's create another function. So over here, I'm going to press enter, enter, and we're going to create another private. Actually, this is going to be a double, and we're going to call this calculate average. Now, you're going to give me the sum. So I'll just call it sum parameter. Well, in order to determine the average, you know how to do that. Like if I gave you 3 exam scores and they're each worth 100, you would add all of those scores and you would divide it by 3, because there's 3 exams. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'll say double average, because that's what we're going to solve for. Well, what is that average going to be equal to? All right, well, first of all, here's the problem. When I give you a sum, I'm giving you an integer. Integers and doubles, you can't mix those. So either you're multiplying a bunch of integers, or you're multiplying a bunch of doubles, or you're adding a bunch of integers or doubles. They all have to be the same data type. Average, as you can see, it has to be double, because it could be 34.5. It could be a number with a decimal point. So what I have to do is I have to temporarily treat this guy as a double. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in double within parentheses, and I'll type in sum parameter. Now, what does that do? See, sum parameter, what is this variable? It's an integer. But temporarily, I am going to treat this as a double. So what we say this is called casting. We are going to temporarily cast this as if it were a double. So for example, if this is 3, this is now 3.0. If this is 4, this is now 4.0. Temporarily. Have I converted some parameter, or maybe changed this declaration to a double? No. You're just temporarily treating it as something else, namely a number with a decimal point. So you know how to change these. If this is 10, this would be 10.0. Okay. This is called promotion. You could take an integer and promote it to a double, right? And so what we're doing is we're forcing this to be treated as a double. Now I can take this and divide it by another double, and that's array size, or casting, I should say, of another double. See, array size, that's an integer. See this guy over here? It's an integer. It's something that you created up at the top of our program. But I can't take a double and divide it by an integer. Doubles have to be divided by doubles. Integers have to be divided by integers. Floats have to be divided by floats. So the idea is I have to cast this or treat this differently. I know it's 3, but I'm going to treat you as 3.0. Okay. Does that make sense? This idea of casting. Well, once I've determined whatever the sum is of all of the exam scores, and I gave that to you because I determined that up here, and then I divide that by how many exams? So I got 3 exams, so now I have the average. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the average. Once I've done that, you'll see that that red squiggly underline now disappears. Okay, and so then there's also one more function that I want to create. So we're going to say private string calculate letter grade. You give me the sum parameter, or you give me a sum of all the exam scores, and then I can determine what the percent is. Once I've determined what the percent is, then I can go ahead and determine what the letter grade should be, such as 90 and above is an A, 80 just before 90 is a B, so forth and so on. Okay, well, I'm going to be returning A, B, C, D, or F. That's why this is string. So let me create a string called letter grade. I'll initialize that to nothing at first. I'm also going to create a variable called percent, because that's really what I'm trying to solve for, is the percent. Well, what is that percent going to be assigned to? So percent, let's assign the following. First of all, if I take the sum and if I divide that by the maximum possible, so let's say, for example, this 3 exams, the student gets a total of 275 because each one is worth 100. So they get 275, and I divide that by the maximum possible. Well, let's see here. 3 exams, they're each worth 100 points, so that would be 300. So it would be 275 divided by 300 gives me the percent. So the addition of all the students' scores divided by the maximum possible for all of the exams, that's how you determine the percent. Okay, so once again, I have to treat this as a double, whatever the sum parameter is. That's going to be divided by, I have to treat the following as a double, and that will be the array size, that's the number of exams, times whatever those exam scores are worth individually. So what this does is it says, okay, I got 3 times 100, that's 300. I need to treat that as a double. I've got the sum, which is the amount that was given to me by the user, or the total of all their scores. A double divided by a double is going to give me a percent. So for example, if this is 300 divided by 300, then the answer will be 1, which 1 is the same thing as 100%. If the division results in 0.09, then that's going to be 0.09 over here, which we know is 90%, so forth and so on. Well, now that I've got this, I can use an if statement. If the percent is greater than or equal to 0.9, if that's true, then my letter grade is going to be A. Else, if the percent is greater than or equal to 0.8, then the letter grade is going to be the letter B. I think what I'll do is I'll just simply copy and paste this and then make it for letter C, letter D, and then the letter F would just simply be an else statement. We'll say letter grade is F. Now over here I need to make some changes. For example, this needs to be 0.7, and if that's the case, that's going to be the letter C. This is going to be 0.6, and if that's the case, this is going to be the letter D. So if your letter grade is above 90, you get an A. If it's above 80, but of course less than 90, it's a B. Above 0.7, 70%, but of course less than 80, that's a C. And then 0.6, that's a D. And then finally, if all of the above is false, then you must have earned an F because your grade had to have been lower than 60%. Once I've determined that, then I can just simply say return the letter grade. Because that's what the whole purpose of this function is to determine the letter grade. Okay, so now that I have these 3 functions, life is going to be really easy for me because I can use these 3 functions, which are nothing more than tools that I've invented, to help me determine the sum, the average, and the letter grade. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over here to my main program, and over here under calculations, let's go ahead and determine what the sum of the exams are. Well, I have a function for that. We just created it. It's called calculate. There it is. Calculate sum. Now, what do you need? It's saying over here, oh, I need an array. See that square bracket right there? It's got you need to give me an integer array, and it's basically an exam. Oh, I've got that. We call that exam scores. So I just simply send to you exam scores. And then, of course, I'm going to put a semicolon at the end. All right, let's determine the average of all the exams. Well, I've got a function for that. It's called calculate average. Now, what do you need? Well, over here, it's saying that you need an integer specifically of all the sums. Well, I've got that, sums of exam, or sum of exams, rather. So sum of exams, that's what I'm going to send to you. And then finally, I need to determine what the letter grade is. Well, the letter grade, I have a function for that called calculate letter grade. It's got right here. Now, what do you need? It says over here, you need to send to me the sum of all the exams. Oh, I've got that over here. So I'm going to send to you the sum of the exams. Isn't that beautiful? When you create a function to take care of this task, it just makes it so much easier to call those functions. They are the ones that do the hard work of calculating the sum, the average, and the letter grade. And then back over here in my main program, I just simply call them, and I give to them parameters, whatever they need, based on how we designed it. Well, now that I've got this part done, I can go ahead and generate the output. That is to put everything into these three labels, LBL, this, this, and this. Okay, so that means LBL sum of exams dot text. Well, I've got the number right here, sum of exams. But first, that's a number, and I have to convert it to a string. So what I'll do is I'll just simply say convert dot to string, oops, sorry, to string, whatever sum of exams is. And we'll put that into the appropriate label. We're ready to also work with LBL average of exams dot text. And once again, we'll say convert dot to string, whatever average of exams is. And then finally, I have LBL letter grade. And now, no conversion is necessary. Why? Well, letter grade, as you can see, is already a string. So if that's already a string, then I don't need to convert a string to a string. It's already a string. So I can just simply say letter grade. Don't forget to click Save All. And now we are ready to run our program. So let me go ahead and click Start. And let's see here. So I'm going to go ahead and enter some grades. Let's say, for example, that I got a 90, a 90, and a 90. Well, that should be an A, right? Let's see what happens. So click Calculate. That's a total of 270. That's right, because 90 plus 90 plus 90 is 270. The average of the exams, yep, it's 90. And our letter grade is the letter A. So looks pretty good. Let me change some scores around. For example, let's say that I have 70 and I have 100, say, for example. What would that be? So first of all, 100 plus 90, that's 190 plus 70 is 260, so that's correct. It looks like the average of the exams is 86.66666. And then, therefore, since it's an 80-something, your letter grade is a B. So everything seems to look very nice. Let's say that maybe I only want 2 numbers after the decimal point instead of however many numbers that it's going to give me. So let me just make that change really fast over here. Instead of using this approach, let me just comment that and show you the alternative approach, which would be LBL average of exams.text. What I'll do is I'll type in the actual string and dot to string like this. And then I'll say, give me a certain number of digits after the decimal point, specifically 2 numbers after the decimal point. Do I have to do this? No. If you wanted to, this is how you would. So I'll start the program again. You see the code over here. Let's see what happens if I hit 70, 90, and 55.7, say, for example. Oops, I'm sorry. The reason why that didn't work, let me break. The reason why that didn't work is I'm trying to convert that 55.7 into an integer, and I can't. So that was my fault for entering a double. Let me do this again. And so let's say here that I have 55, 77, and 97, say, for example. All right, 229, 76.33. That's the fixed number of digits, specifically 2 numbers out of the decimal. And since it's a 70-something, that's the letter C. Yes, question?
I got an error in the private string calculate letter grade. I think I might have missed.
So calculate the letter grade. If there's an error, double check your spelling. Make sure your syntax is correct. Make sure that you have created a string letter grade, a double percent. Where does the error exist? In the if statement, or? But where specifically? Are you going to get like a red squiggly underline?
Yeah, it's a squiggly line under the word calculate.
Right here?
Yeah.
Do you have an open and close curly braces?
Yes.
So you have this one, and you also have this one right here that matches it. Okay.
I don't have the return.
Ah, that's what it is, the return, yes. So let me do that so I can simulate what you've got on your screen. So I'll delete this. So this is what you see?
Yep.
Yep, okay, very good. So we want to make sure that we have, let me undo the return letter grade. Good, good, yeah, you're welcome. And so I think that's it. If you wanted to go through the program, you could stop it at any particular location. I could run the program. Let me just go ahead and enter some values like 70, 80, 90. Click calculate. The program is stopping right here. Notice that I have the array. If I click on that tiny triangle, it shows me what the values are right now. They're all 0. But as I step through these, now if I hover over, you can see there's the 70, 80, and 90, right? Because that's what the user entered in the text box. And then, of course, if I wanted to take a look at these functions, I could click this guy to step into a function. And so when I step into the function, here's the array that you sent to me. And so those are the values. And now I can take that array to add these items up. Let me just go through this one function, and then I'll let you investigate the others on your own. So over here within a for statement, I am going to take this sum, which I set to 0. See that? I set to 0. So here's the old value of the sum. What I'm about to do now is I'm about to take this array element, I. Well, what is I? Currently, I is 0. So what is exam 0? Oh, that's 70. I'm about to take 70 and add it to 0. And so now you see that the sum is 70. All right. Shall we do this again? Well, first let me increment I. Is I less than? So is 1 less than the array size? Yes. So we go inside here again. Sum was 70. We are about to take that 70 and add it to I is what right now? It looks like I is 1. What's exam array parameter 1? Oh, that's 80. So 80 is about to be added to 70. And now sum is 150, right? Because that's the addition of 70 plus 80. So we go back over here. We increment I++. We ask the question, is I less than array size? Well, this is 3. What's I? Oh, it looks like it's 2. Yeah, 2 is less than 3. So we're going to do this again. All right? Now, sum was 150. We are now going to add that to whatever this counter is, 2. Well, what's exam 2? Oh, that's 90. So 90 is about to be added to 150, and so that's why you see over here the sum is 240. Now we are finished with the for statement, so we are about to return the number 240. So when I click continue, it goes back over here. Here's the 240. Here's the average. Here's the letter grade. And that's it. All right, so this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.